MultiAsian.Church, Chapter 6, Characteristics and Traits. The most frequently asked question about next-generation multi-Asian churches, after its definition, is its characteristics and traits. What are the characteristics and traits of these churches, and how do they differ from the typical ethnic Asian church? What do they look like? Before I describe the common characteristics, note that there are a variety of Asian American churches because of the wide diversity of many Asian ethnicities, languages, and cultures. It should be obvious that a Chinese person going to a Korean church or Vietnamese church would probably feel just as lost going to a Caucasian church. The experience of the Christian life is more than language alone. It also involves culture, relationships, and theology. In the new book by Dr. Benjamin Shin and Dr. Cheryl Takagi-Silzer, Tapestry of Grace, Untangling the Cultural Complexities in Asian American Life and Ministry, there is a chapter that presents a comparison of Chinese and Korean spirituality on how their cultural perspectives affect various aspects of their Christianity, including spiritual habits, faith expressions, and view of pastors. Let me first recognize the similarities that most, if not all, Asian American churches have, both the ones that are reaching first-generation foreign-born immigrants and their American-born subsequent generations. Marginalization. Asian Americans have a shared experience as a minority racial group in an American society with a majority that's largely Caucasian, followed by Latino and African Americans. American history has been blemished with injustices that discriminated against Asians in America, including the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, Japanese internment camps, as well as portraying racially insensitive and offensive Asian stereotypes in television and movies. The reality of being Asian American in an imperfect American society is that having an Asian face will be the subject of unjust discrimination, prejudices, misunderstandings, and unintentional offenses. Group-oriented. Growing up around Asians cultivates the deferential habits of thinking first about the group's collective needs over one's individual preferences. Here's an example. This socialization may be observed on the occasion of a small group having a lengthy discussion deciding on where to eat for lunch. Shame-based. Many Asian Americans have been affected by the honor-shame values of Asian cultures through their family history. This affects both their sense of belonging and how relationships are restored. Through her TED Talks, books, and seminars, Brené Brown raises awareness of shame in American society, but I have to say that I don't think she adequately explains the nuances of shame in an Asian context. She aptly describes the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is, I did something bad. Shame is, I am bad. Guilt would say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Shame would feel, I'm sorry, I am a mistake. In recent years, theologians like Jackson Wu, author of Saving God's Face, a Chinese contextualization of salvation through honor and shame, and Jason Georges, have articulated valuable insights about the Christian life and the Bible, which better contextualizes the honor-shame cultures. Identify with a specific Asian ethnicity. Most Asian Americans self-identify with their ethnic heritage rather than a generic Asian American. Note, there may be an exception for children of mixed Asian parents, as in Korean married to Chinese, to self-identify as Asian American. Typically, a next-generation multi-Asian church will have a lineage traced to a specific Asian ethnicity since it was likely planted by one. Even when that connection is not explicitly stated, a Vietnamese American, for example, will intuitively and subconsciously recognize differences between one church with Korean American lineage versus another church with Japanese American lineage. In other words, having an English-speaking church doesn't mean that all Asian Americans from different ethnic backgrounds will easily come together. Missions mindedness. Ethnic Asian churches reaching first-generation Asian immigrants have a natural affinity to bring the gospel to people in their country of origin and other countries around the world because of their common language and ethnicity. Next-generation multi-Asian churches tend to be strongly missions-minded, but often with a people group different from themselves. I've observed that while every church plant has to be actively evangelistic in its own community for its own survival and sustainability, it seems that next-generation multi-Asian churches actively start participating in world missions in its early years. Aside from similarities, there are characteristics in these next-generation multi-Asian churches that are different than ethnic Asian churches. While not every next-generation multi-Asian church has all of these characteristics, these are the ones from most of the churches I have observed. Incidentally, there may be ethnic Asian churches reaching first-generation immigrants that possess one or more of these characteristics. Obviously, the one characteristic that is common for all next-generation multi-Asian churches is English speaking. Here are 5 characteristics common with next-generation multi-Asian churches by corollary, less common with ethnic Asian churches. Leadership. Next-generation Asian Americans have grown up in an American context with a particular value for leadership development. The proliferation of many courses, books, and conferences on Christian leadership has become a prominent part of churches since the 1980s. It is partly due to our growing understanding in organizational management that is being applied in some churches to more effectively and efficiently fulfill its mission and vision. It's more acceptable among next-generation multi-Asian churches to use vocabulary associated with strategic planning. Mission, vision, values, strategies, tactics, results, and metrics. This is just how things are done in an American context. There isn't enough space to compare and contrast, but suffice it to say that American leadership styles are very different from Asian leadership styles. Church leaders are identified and selected based on character and Christian maturity according to 1 Timothy 3, 1-7. For next generation Asian American church leaders, it is also based on competencies and alignment to vision, in contrast to a traditional Asian church value for social status, age, and wealth. One next generation Asian American pastor who has ministered in both cultural contexts keenly observed this. The priority leadership value in an American church is vision, while the priority value in an Asian church is family. I think that's a good summary. To share with you one example of visionary leadership, let me share the one I know well. Pastor Ray Chang is the founding pastor of Ambassador Bible Church in Northern Virginia. We met while we were both at Dallas Theological Seminary in 1991. Even though he grew up in a typical immigrant Korean family, he didn't readily fit into a traditional ethnic Korean church. Ray's ministry background was greatly influenced through Christian ministries like Calvary Chapel, Evangelical Free Church of Fullerton, Biola University, and Talbot School of Theology. A couple years later, Pastor Ray was pastoring a young English ministry at an ethnic Korean church in a townhouse model as described in chapter 4. One day in a side conversation with one of his members, he asked the question, "Why don't you invite your non-Christian co-workers to our church?" The member reluctantly replied, "But this is a Korean American church and they would feel uncomfortable." Pastor Ray began to see how easily a culture becomes the main reason for gathering rather than Christ or his mission. While driving through Washington, D.C., Pastor Ray noticed the many embassies representing countries from all around the world. The verse from 2 Corinthians 5:20 came to mind. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. Pastor Ray caught a vision for how the church could be an embassy for the kingdom of God. With a dozen people in his apartment, God brought together this small multi-ethnic group to launch Ambassador Bible Church in 1996 with a multi-ethnic vision. This group of 12 had a kind of next-generation multi-ethnic mix, multi-Asian diversity, with Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, and Caucasians. I was invited to join Pastor Ray at Ambassador Bible Church as an associate pastor in fall 1997, and we saw it grow from 70 to 140 in about 3 years. We saw people come to Christ from different nationalities and ethnicities. We saw how God provided through his people for his vision, and we met and exceeded our church budget every year. I still remember to this day the church's vision statement that we all had to memorize in membership class: to make and equip disciples from all nationalities to be Christ's ambassadors to all the nations. Pastor Ray's visionary leadership laid a solid foundation for this church that has continued to this very day. Ambassador Bible Church is now even more diverse than ever, reaching over 400 in attendance and reproducing by planting another multi-ethnic church just as this chapter is being written. Creativity. Many next-generation multi-Asian churches have a value for creativity that's shown in its visual arts and presentation. When you visit their church websites, you'll see a contemporary website design with introductory information to welcome visitors and social media links along with recent sermons and church announcements. During a worship service, creativity may be seen in the use of video clips for sermon illustrations, energetic spiritual music, or aesthetically pleasing decoration in the worship and fellowship spaces. In contrast, an ethnic Asian church would more likely have formal traditions of hymns and a choir, invocation, or silent meditation. Echo Church embodies creative use of media to communicate the gospel message in compelling, relevant ways that reaches next generation young adults, also known as the millennial generation. During my first visit to Echo Church in Fullerton, California, I found myself driving into an industrial area with warehouses near the local municipal airport. They met in a nondescript warehouse building with contemporary wood paneling on the outside. I recognized the church logo as I walked in and was kindly greeted by a couple young adults without being handed a church bulletin. I walked into the worship space, which was dimly lit, creating a quiet mood while soft music played in the background and a video loop of imagery played on the two rear projection screens up front. It felt like a safe and inviting space. Wood paneling, similar in style to what was outside, engulfed the stage, where the drums, electric guitars, and electronic keyboard were set up for the worship band. A wooden cross stood at center stage. The worship team came on stage. A word of welcome and opening prayer kicked off a time of worship that lasted about 45 minutes. Then there was a time of fellowship for a few minutes to chat and greet your neighbors. I estimated over 200 young adults filled the worship space that day. The sermon was shared in a conversational tone with good storytelling intermixed. I noticed an interesting juxtaposition. The band played behind the cross while the preacher delivered the sermon in front of it. Echo Church showed a lot of attention to detail in its visual and graphic design throughout, from the church website to the worship space. I found out later that the warehouse space is borrowed, and I think it's great that two churches would share space together to maximize its usage. Echo also published a beautifully designed printed magazine to tell its story and values in an engaging manner. A graphically designed banner image complements every sermon series. Furthermore, their social media presence on Facebook and YouTube further extends its storytelling of doing life in community. As communication professor Marshall McLuhan's adage says, "The medium is the message." Social justice. Many next-generation multi-Asian churches recognize the value of all people beyond their own ethnicity. The gospel of Jesus Christ is good news for the here and now, not only for eternal life in heaven. In John 10:10, Jesus said, "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." More specifically to social justice, the Bible says in Micah 6:8, "He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." And in Isaiah 1:17, "Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause." In our world that is obviously broken with recent news of terrifying incidents of violence in America and elsewhere, the church has an urgent opportunity to take a more active role in bringing hope and healing to the whole world. Even here in America, one of the wealthiest of first world nations, there is brokenness in our own backyard, and next generation multi-Asian churches want to be actively involved in serving their neighboring community. While an ethnic Asian church does well in serving immigrants of their own ethnicity, next generation churches are desiring to serve those in need within their immediate locality, regardless of ethnicity or race. The first example is a church with justice as its core value, Epic Church. Epic Church originated as an idea for a church that would reach a different kind of individual who are not interested in the normal church. Founding pastor Kevin Doi, a next-generation Asian American of Japanese descent, didn't grow up in church. When he became a Christian, he had a difficult time finding a church that was a safe place for his friends, where hard questions could be asked, while ambiguity, not certainty, was embraced and appreciated. He also had a concern for healing and justice, wanting to help create a therapeutic community which addressed people's relational worlds and the systemic inequalities in society. They started in 1998 with a small group of 20-somethings meeting together in Orange County, California. They moved several times over the years, finally landing in Fullerton. Epic came to realize that God had called them not to reach a certain group of individuals, but to commit themselves to a specific place. One of the results of their new mission was to launch Hoya Scholars, a nonprofit organization inspired and preparing students from underserved communities in Fullerton toward higher education. Now in its 7th year, Hoya Scholars is supported by civic and business leaders, school districts, and local colleges, as well as universities. Hoya provides one-on-one mentoring, tutoring, college prep workshops, and tours, with volunteers coming from Epic Church, Cal State Fullerton, other nearby churches, and the wider community. The second example is a church that recognizes doing justice is an integral part of being faithful to living out the gospel. Jaya and Daniel So make up the husband and wife team who planted Anchor City Church in San Diego at the start of 2014. Just like any church plant journey, discerning and responding to God's call to plant involved the convergence of many different factors. As 2.0 Korean Americans, both Jaya and Daniel understood what it meant to be outsiders, neither accepted as fully American because of their Asian faces, nor accepted as fully Korean, either in Korea or in America. After serving in English ministries of ethnic Korean churches for many years, they began to sense a broader call to bless, serve, and reach the city in all its fullness and diversity. Drawing on their own experience of how God redeemed their sense of being neither nor to become both and people, Jaya and Daniel responded to God's call to plant a church where people who felt like outsiders could not find their place or felt like they had one foot in two different worlds could experience deep friendship and community. Psalm 68:6, God sets the lonely in families, has been a core guiding verse for Anchor City. When I asked Pastor Daniel what makes Anchor City unique, he answered with a smile, "We're just a normal church." He went on further to explain that as pastors, the goal for he and Jaya is to awaken and empower each member of the church to live out their God-given dreams and on mission for Jesus, both in the context of serving at church as well as in day-to-day, at the places they live, work, and play. Family and the table are guiding metaphors for Anchor City as they seek to build a faithful and fruitful community. Jaya and Daniel often joke with their church. When we share meals together, we open our mouths to the meal and our hearts to each other. At each home group meeting, they share not only Bible study and prayer requests, but a meal around the table. In the 2.5 years since they planted, Anchor City has grown in attendance, but the numerical growth has tended to be slow and steady. Some people have found the church through their website and social media presence, but the vast majority have come through word of mouth and relational connections. Because San Diego is a transitional city in many ways, difficult for young adults to find jobs, Anchor City has seen a number of people leave the area due to their work. They try to be intentional as a sending church, blessing people as they leave San Diego. In pursuing whole life discipleship, Anchor City has expressed their commitment to join in God's mission of redemption in the world, both in words and in action. The pastors preach regularly on the importance of stewarding whole lives for God's glory and the importance of personal and relational evangelism. The church community has taken special Easter and Advent offerings where 100% of the giving went to nonprofit organizations serving foster care children, restoring victims of human trafficking in San Diego, and fighting modern-day slavery in India. Home groups have prepared care packages for senior citizens. The youth group has partnered with local food banks, and Anchor City sent a vision team to Nepal last year to learn from local pastors and leaders and to partner with them in their faithful work. Celebratory worship. The music portion during a Next Generation MultiAsian Church worship service is celebratory and contemporary rather than solemn and reverent. The musical accompaniment is likely a 5-piece band with drums, bass, keyboard, electric guitar, and acoustic guitar. The songs are mostly from praise and worship genre, with popular songs by Passion, Bethel, and Hillsong with the likes of Chris Tomlin, Matt Redman, Kerry Jobe, or Joel Houston. In many ways, the sound of worship is similar to a corresponding evangelical church that is largely Caucasian in its majority. When you open your eyes and look around, however, those in attendance will appear far more ethnically diverse in the Next Generation MultiAsian Church. And the other differences are far more nuanced, noticeably only to the trained eyes and ears in the style of music played and how the songs are sung. And there are subtle differences between these next generation churches too. For churches with Chinese American or Japanese American roots, the worship music may be softer, slower, and more meditative. For churches with Korean American roots, the worship music will be comparatively louder and sung expressively and more passionately. I've measured the loudness on an occasion, and it was right up to 99 decibels in one Korean American church. Aesthetic quality. Partly due to valuing frugality, many ethnic Asian churches, combined with the immigrant story of survival, perceived dispensing resources for art and aesthetics in a church setting as being a waste of money. On the contrary, chances are you will not see a Xerox church bulletin at a next generation multi-Asian church. For the next generation Asian American pastors, an American value for excellence in aesthetics is more visibly seen in its logo design, worship space decor, lighting, audio and visuals, all embedded into everything that a church does. This isn't to say that the level of quality and production value in a next generation multi-Asian church could rival the high production value of a worship experience in a megachurch setting, but it is to say that there's an apparent difference between a next generation church versus the ethnic Asian church. It just looks and feels differently. Being married to an artist, I received personal tutoring in the area of art appreciation. To get a sense of what this characteristic looks like, you can browse the websites of next generation MultiAsian churches, which are listed at MultiAsian.Church/directory. To highlight a few, take a look at Quest Church, Church of the Beloved, and Vision Church. One more thing. There are other characteristics that take on a certain flavor in next generation multi-Asian churches. Since everything is done in English, things look very similar to a typical mainstream evangelical church on the surface. But there are subcultural distinctives that are worth noting and noticing. Pastor Wilson Wang planted Renew Church in Fullerton, California, with a vision to make followers of Jesus through missional communities that display the gospel through words, life together, and sacrificial love. With the support of Ambassador Church as its mother church, or sending church, Renew Church has become more diverse since its inception, with about 35 to 40% non-Asians in weekly attendance. At an exponential church planting conference workshop, Pastor Wilson described how the group orientation from his Chinese American upbringing has contributed most significantly to the church life of Renew Church. The underlying trait that is inherent for many Asian Americans, bringing together valuable cultural elements from both East and West, that is, the group-oriented collective mentality and being concerned for the whole group without having to explicitly say it out loud. This bonds the next generation Asian Americans with non-Asian millennials. This is seen in how Renew Church does its outreach, which is essential to the survival of a church plant. They found that when their small group outreach as a team, as a missional community, it was more inviting and effective. A typical American church would exhort its members to be evangelistic by being a missionary, to invite friends, neighbors, and co-workers to church events, which is a more individualistic mindset. Instead, outreach was baked into how small groups are done at Renew Church, and small groups meet and reach out right where they lived, in apartment complexes and neighborhoods. And for someone without any church background, going to a smaller gathering with a neighbor would be less threatening than a big event. Doing life together is another aspect of how this group orientation helps build relationships. For a typical majority culture churchgoer, worship services tend to be an event on the calendar, where you go to church for 90 minutes and everyone scatters on their own way for the rest of the day. For Asian Americans who have attended ethnic Asian churches in the past, being a part of church was an all-day affair because church served as a community center for first-generation Asians to connect through their native language and culture. That's partly why lunch programs are commonly found in ethnic Asian churches. In a church like Renew, this value for community and relationship beyond the worship service resides deeply in its culture. People worship together and stay afterwards for another hour or two to fellowship, then head out to eat together. In similar fashion, during the course of the week, they do life together by going to the movies and cafes, visiting each other's homes, and meeting as small groups. This kind of group cohesion is a part of everyday relationships rather than a church-mandated program. A third way that this group orientation comes into play is the instinct for inclusion. Asian Americans have an awareness for people who are left out. Whether it's during worship service or during a fellowship time, Pastor Wilson values a culture where every person in the room is engaged in a conversation. If one person is standing alone, someone will come along, start a conversation, and extend an invitation for community. For example, "Hey, why don't you come to lunch with us?" Or, "If you're not doing anything this afternoon, come and join us for basketball." These values for communities and living missionally and doing life together come out of Pastor Wilson's ethnic Chinese church experience and community-oriented Asian culture. He has found that it's resonated with millennials longing for church to be more than a Sunday service, but rather an honest and interconnected community. Caveat: the characteristics listed above of next-generation multi-Asian churches are descriptive and not prescriptive. They were not systematically identified through data analysis from a survey or interviews. They are merely a broad paintbrush stroke of things I've noticed through my networking and research. As an Asian American of Chinese descent myself, I may not be aware of additional characteristics that someone who is non-Asian would more easily notice. That's one of the things about a cultural context that makes it hard to describe by someone who is immersed in it. It's like a fish being asked to describe the waters it's swimming in. While the examples are mostly Asian Americans from East Asian descent, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, next-generation Asian American churches, pastors, and ministry leaders are rising up from Southeast Asian and South Asian backgrounds too. The Southeast Asian Catalyst has hosted national leadership conferences every other year since 2006 for next-generation Southeast Asian Christian ministry leaders from ethnic backgrounds like Hmong, Mien, Lao, Vietnamese, Thai, Cambodian, and others. The Advance Initiative was launched in 2015 to equip next-generation Asian Indian American church planters to launch healthy multi-ethnic churches. These next-generation multi-Asian churches are showing us creative ways to reach more people in the younger generations, both Asian and non-Asian. Because these churches are agile and adaptable, they're doing ministry in different ways than the traditional ethnic Asian churches. I think they give us a picture of what future Asian American churches would look like, as many indicators show that existing ethnic Asian church models are not as effective in reaching the fast-growing Asian American populations on the brink of doubling in our lifetime.